Thanks to the Journalist and Writers Foundation to invite me in this August program, and especially to talk about SDG 16, which is very close to my heart. Not because it is important thing, but also I believe that a lot of the effort that we are putting in terms of development are surrounding many specific issues rather than the one which need a whole lot of attention from the international community is getting very less, which is SDG 16. So probably that's one of the reasons why I feel very it is important to discuss about this issue more than the other. So thanks Journalists and Writers Foundation to take this initiative. Dear panelists and the listener and the viewer, my discussion point is about the access to justice, which is again one of the component of SDG 16. Without going to the background of the discussion, and I know that all of our participants quite familiar with the discussion, I want to go straight to the point where the SDG 16 and the component of access to justice, what does that really means, and how this is going to affect a lot of other institutions. What is the nature of SDG 16's access to justice component vis-a-vis the other component in a functional modality? What is the challenge of measuring this particular component, and how to overcome this situation? I would also like to go a little bit more detail from the text that we have already in terms of what UNDP has come up with and what UN has been doing, rather than some of the practical challenges that we are facing in our day-to-day life. So with that notion, let us start in the discussion process. First of all, SDG 16 and the access to justice component has a clear characteristics of overlapping feature. So it is not something that goes alone. It is not something that stands alone as a achievable component. Rather, it has the overlapping feature with all other targets within the scope of SDG 16. So if we think about the strong institution, it has a clear relationship with the notion of judiciary system itself. When we talk about peace, when we talk about the war kind of situation, or extrajudicial killing, or trafficking, or child rights, these are also some of the components that overlaps with the notion of access to justice. So in that regard, the feature of overlapping is a very important characteristics of the access to justice component. The second component that I think is also important to understand when we discuss about access to justice, the understanding about the access is not uniform in everywhere. So the word of access itself has a very different kind of connotation depending on where you are. So for example, a person in a society which pretty much hierarchical, the notion of access is very different than the person who is living in a free society. So the interpretation of that access to justice itself are pretty much used by the dominant political force in the society, in the country, for their own benefit in many senses, in many cases. And that's what really makes a lot of other consequence, a lot of other feature, which relatively impacting the human rights condition of the country. So with that discussion, if we just move ourselves to a very specific kind of challenges that we face when it comes to SDG 26 access to justice component, the indicator that we use to assess that access to justice is basically two. 16.3.1 and 16.3.2. That's two. The first one is all about the idea of criminal, crime reputation, and then the other one is unsentenced detainee. If we just think about the indicator itself, we can see the stark contrast with what UN itself perceived as the indicator of rule of law. Under the UN system, we know there is at least minimum 135 indicator regarding the rule of law, whereas SDG 16 is only calculating 2 out of this 135. So the gap is enormous, and it is very obvious that just by report on the criminal prosecution and the detainee, we cannot obviously understand the whole state of access to justice. Yeah, there are so many other issues; those are relevant here, but unfortunately, the report of SD Justice is unable to really capture the whole notion of access to justice itself. So that's really my third component of the discussion. Now, the fourth component of the discussion, and I think that's also very important, the way we use those indicators, the way we collect the data for the reporting or for the voluntary report or the progress report, even in that case, are often very much restricted in the nature. As we all know, that our shipment from the MDG to SDG happened just to bring ourselves from this narrow interpretation of development and move towards a very inclusive idea of sustainable development. But whereas when you're talking about this collection method of the data, how we process the report, we often focus ourselves on a very restricted way of collecting data, rather than getting it from the third source, or even the possibility of civil society participation and providing a subsidiary data in that regard is often very restricted. So if this is the case, we can see that the only available source of data is our government institutions. And unfortunately, most of the government institutions are not really capable enough to do that kind of data support. Yeah. So if we don't have the data, if we don't have those information, we're not going to achieve the right state. We don't understand the right state. And of course, the policy formation cannot take place. This is a very big challenge. And that leads me to my fifth point of the discussion. And I think this is again a very important issue when you're talking about the participation and the authority of the state over some of its institutions. For example, when we are talking about state institutions are supporting data, we know that some of the institutions could be very much biased depending on what is the political structure and establishment of that country. So depending on that, a country establishment can easily motivate and to some extent they can change the data, they can change this information, those are available. And if this is the case, that means we are basically assessing a country on a complete wrong data, or complete wrong set of information. And that really gives us a very, I would say, not a very positive kind of situation. If we just look about some of the extreme kind of government and strong institutions, strong government emerging in many countries, what they are doing, they are manipulating the judiciary. And that's exactly what is happening in many countries. And what we are seeing that the tool judiciary as an independent pillar of the state, it has been changed to be a tool of excessive power or control, whatever we can say. Yeah, and that also gives us the discussion of it is one of the way how the human rights situation are being really violated in many domestic levels. So when you're talking about SDG and you're saying about the national support as an indicative feature and international support as a normative feature or comparative feature, we are lost. We are lost because none of those are connected. So these are some of the very basic challenges I try to bring in the discussion, and I think that it is really time because we are passing the phasing time. We are passing the time to progress, creating more progress report. So this is really the time to reflect ourselves and especially reflect those who are at the policy making stage to see and invade that whether it is a correct policy, is a correct process, the framework that we are really focusing on, whether this is really functional framework or not. We need to challenge that thing, and if it is needed, we need to go back and review. I mean, that's what happened over time. So if needed, we need to review the whole thing, and we need to see how things could be adjusted, corrected, and bring for the betterment of the protection of human rights and ensuring the access to justice. I would try to stop here because there are so many other issues, and I think the Q&A session will bring those things together. So thank you very much.